Greetings, people of the interwebs. Jake here. So, as of only a few moments ago, at least that I'm finding this out, that I think it was either Deadline or the Hollywood Reporter, one of those two outlets, basically confirmed via Amazon that Rings of Power season 3 is happening. Now, granted, this is no surprise probably to anybody, and like I addressed in my last video, is I kind of knew it was going to happen, and even though the last two seasons have not really gone over very well, it was just Amazon were still going, like, there's like a 90% chance that they're still going to renew the show for season 3. Now again, the fact that it's taken this long to like officially like announce that they're making a season 3, like, tells me that Amazon are maybe uh, very much aware and like not. And I guess they had to have been aware even with the first season how poorly it was received. But I think after the first two seasons and just how again poorly received they were, how few people actually watched the show, and how little of an impact it had in like the cultural zeitgeist, I think I'm sure Amazon are trying to come up with some kind of game plan. And in the article, again, I can't remember if it was Variety or the Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, whichever one of those, but basically, they in that article they stated that in season 3 there's going to be a time jump. They didn't specify like how big of a time jump, but I'm assuming several years at least. And basically, it's Sauron is now forging the One Ring of Power, which he's a little too late because I've got it here in my hand. But and it's also going to focus on the War of the Elves and Sauron. However, I'm actually not opposed to the time jump because I think this time jump can hopefully get them in a good spot to where they, in theory, can maybe get on track of actually telling like the story in the lore. Potentially, I have very little faith that that will happen, but the part of me that's trying to be optimistic is that like okay, Amazon knows that they've got a problem on their hands. Maybe doing this time jump can give them a way to kind of do not a soft reboot, but hopefully course correct with the story in of itself. But also, again, as far as I know, like they're bringing the same creative team back, so yeah, that's where any optimism that I do have is kind of clearly just out the window. Uh, yeah, so I don't think that the time jump is a bad idea, especially for the Numenorian storyline, because Numenor plays a very large part in the Second Age, especially like in defeating Sauron, because basically Sauron's raging war with the elves, because at the time they're the dominant power in Middle Earth, until the Numenorians show up and just decimate Sauron and his army, and even capture Sauron, bring him back to Numenor as a prisoner. However, here's where I think the whole war with elves and Sauron, though, I think it's a part of me thinks it's kind of odd because like one of the biggest battles in that war is the sack of Eregion, which they already did in season 2 and did horribly. Like that whole battle was just completely nonsensical. Like there was no I'm no military expert or anything like that, but even watching that show, I was still just like, these tactics make no sense at all. Um, but also, again, like that's kind of one of the biggest battles that Tolkien wrote about. Now, that being said, they could make up their own like battles and events and stuff like that take place during the War of the Elves and Sauron. I don't think they'll do it well because they've clearly proven that they can't handle the source material at all. But I'm assuming that's probably going to be one thing they're going to do is pad the runtime with some kind of other like probably smaller battles because the show really only does like one big battle like per season. But if they're going to do that, here's what I would do. So I would primarily just focus on the Elvish storyline and the Numenorians. Just cut the Harfoots out entirely because it's awful. It does not. It doesn't push the narrative forward whatsoever. It just slows things down. I don't think anybody really likes the Harfoot storyline. Even the people who did like were more positive on the show. So you can cut that out entirely. And even though the dwarves were my favorite part of season 1, I didn't really care for that sideline or side story in season 2. And also, I don't really know where that's going, anyways. So you could probably cut that out too entirely, and it's not going to make a difference. So I'll just focus on the Elvish storyline, the Numenorian one. And again, if they're going to do a big climactic battle, I would do it like in the lore, where basically the Numenorians show up, they just steamroll over Sauron's army, and they capture him. So that could actually be a cool season finale. Is Sauron's captured, they're dragging him back to Numenor as a prisoner, and season 4, again, assuming that they're still going to do these 5 seasons, is season 4. And this is also like if I were in charge and kind of trying to make do with what I've got, which is sadly very little because of how terrible this show is. But season 4, I would kind of like scale things down and have it be more of like, and I may be in the minority here with this idea, but kind of focus more on like the psychological aspect of basically Sauron. Because in the lore, basically Sauron, he's originally a prisoner, but then he kind of works his way up to an advisor to Ar-Pharazôn, the king of Numenor, and basically corrupts Numenor from the inside, and even starts building like temples and stuff like that dedicated to the worship of Morgoth, and he's basically the one that solidifies like the Numenorian descent, because they are already like kind of slipping by in the latter part of the Second Age. They're growing envious of the elves and their immortality, and they're just kind of growing more oppressive to the non-Numenorian humans of Middle-earth. And just kind of, again, slipping down, even though they were becoming more powerful militarily, it kind of came at the cost of them becoming more disconnected from Middle-earth as a whole. In terms of, like, you know, their alliances and stuff like that outside of the Faithful, which is, Elendil leads the Faithful, that's a whole other thing. But again, that's something that they could focus on too in season 4. Is the different, because they kind of touched on it a little bit in season 2, but they really need to flesh this out of like why there's division between the Faithful and the King's Men, and why Elendil decides to basically go into exile with his followers and his 2 sons, Isildur and Anarion, to Middle-earth, where they eventually found Gondor and Arnor. So that's what I would focus on in season 4, is just primarily focus on Numenor. You can flash back over to like the elves and maybe like the dwarves periodically, but I wouldn't do a whole lot with the dwarves or elves. I'd primarily do season 4, focus on Numenor, and then season 5 is or even towards the end of season 4, is the fall of Numenor. Like, you could do another time jump where, like, episode 1 of season 4 is Sauron having worked his way up to the advisor of Ar-Pharazôn. He's walking freely, he's no longer a prisoner, and that could be a cool season finale for season 4, is the downfall of Numenor, and maybe the last shot you see is Elendil and the Faithful landing ashore in Middle-earth. And then season 5 would obviously be like the Last Alliance, like the forming of the Last Alliance. And I would guess, and I think what I would do is make it, especially with this show, is at least try to do spectacle and do it well, unlike the last 2 seasons where they really haven't even been that great at spectacle in terms of like the action sequences and battles and stuff like that. But I would focus like that last season, just primarily focus on the spectacle of, like, you know, the first half, the members of the Last Alliance, like the dwarves, elves, Numenorians, all uniting, kind of getting their game plan, and then just the last half, their assault on Mordor, which took, I forget how long it actually took, but several years. Because I think just the siege of Barad-dûr was like 7 years. So I think it was like well over a decade that they were like fighting at the border of Mordor and in Mordor itself. And so, yeah, that's what I would do. I don't think this is what's going to happen because, again, this show, the writers and the showrunners don't really know what they're doing. They don't really understand the lore, and they're also just really bad storytellers. Because this show is nothing but fan fiction, and as I've said before, and I'll continue to say, it's not even good fan fiction. Because that's the thing. there is good fan fiction out there of any fandom you can think of, whether it be Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, or Marvel, DC, whatever. Most of it's, I feel like, not great. But there is some good fan fiction, or fan-made films, which I guess is kind of the same thing. But yeah, Rings of Power is just awful. It's terrible. And again, hopefully, Amazon will take this time to actually, for once, learn from their mistakes and try to improve upon that rather than just, tripling down at this point in season 3 and just ignoring what, the criticism has been for the show. But yeah, so that was just a quick little video, my thoughts on season 3 being renewed, which again was kind of inevitable, and just what I would do with this show going forward if I were in charge and couldn't just scrap it all and start from the beginning. That would be a very long video of how I would do a Second Age show. That, I don't know, I might do at some point if people are interested, but yeah, that more or less wraps up this video. Hopefully you enjoyed. Do the usual YouTube-y stuff, like, comment, share, subscribe, all that jazz, and until next time, everyone, cheers.